HeroQuest is the game of all time. Well, okay, maybe that tagline belongs to another game, but still, immediately recognizable, often copied, never reproduced, except for in 2021 when it was literally, never mind that, never mind any of that. We love it, you probably love it, and it's probably the reason why you're even here at all, watching this video, listening to my voice. But it would be overly charitable to ignore the problems that this game has. Naive or just plain incorrect to say that it is perfect as it stands. Nothing is without flaw. So let's dig in, be honest, and analyze the top 10 worst things about HeroQuest. And we'll start with number 1, which is low-hanging fruit, but it is the doors. No, not that doors. I'm talking about these 1 tile by half tile wide, unclosable bottlenecks to gameplay, action, economy, accessibility. What's annoying about them to me is that they've undergone very little change in the decades that the game has been out. Sure, we have some aesthetic improvements, and different visuals are key and necessary when you are bringing in new versions of old gameplay components. The portcullis here, for example, which has slightly different mechanics than a regular door. And don't even get me started on the wood and metal doors, 2 of the most mechanically useless additions to, unfortunately, every expansion. One marks the start of a quest and the other one marks the end. Great job. Now that's not at all to say that doors haven't had some improvements over the years. The Against the Ogre Horde arena door, for example, is a real banger. This thing is great in so many ways, not the least of which is something that it addresses that the game has suffered from for so long, and that's doorway combat, which is the real reason that doors is on this list at all. Play HeroQuest for more than 10 seconds and you'll eventually run into the problem of doorway combat. A phenomena wherein your players discover that when standing in front of a door, or in a narrow corridor, a given monster can only target one of your heroes. Doorway combat is known by the community, and there have been many attempts to stall it, mitigate it, or outright prevent it. Even in a room full of very powerful enemies, if there are no mechanics other than open the door and place the enemies and furniture on the board, the doorway effectively enforces a meta strategy. And for maximum efficacy, the heroes will have little choice but to follow the strategy, which results in the same 4 to 20 turns played out the same way. Strong hero moves in front of door and attacks monster. Gets attacked on his turn. When it's his turn, he will attack the monster back, then move out of the way, and the second strongest hero will move in the place of the old hero in front of the door. Creative Zargons can spice things up in the middle of the game using the movement and actions that are provided to them, rules as written. No homebrew necessary, but it's still kind of a pain to have to figure out because it's something that might affect your table in a negative way. Number 2, traps. Any dungeon crawler, whether it's a great one, a good one, a bad or mediocre one, needs to have a certain number of elements. Not necessarily to qualify as a dungeon crawler technically, but because it's the law. If there's 2 things that dungeons have, it's monsters and traps. And I guess treasure, but we'll get to that. Traps in HeroQuest are part of a larger system that is also on this list, but we'll save that for later. For now, suffice it to say that traps are little more than RNG gotchas. Step on a tile when you haven't searched that room for traps yet, and you may trigger a trap. They're normally not random. Traps are usually designated in the map for the quest. And there are a few different kinds of traps, but there are just no mechanics around the traps other than run into them and then roll dice. Well, there are 2 exceptions to this. One is the toolkit, and another is the inherent ability of the dwarf. That's on the hero side. Those are the things that you have control over. The other 2 exceptions, which are on the trap side, the things that you don't have any control over, are their permanence on the board. Most traps do not have any sort of permanence on the board whatsoever, but the pit trap is a trap that will remain on the board long after you have discovered it, whether or not you have disarmed it, which disarming a pit trap is fairly useless in this game. All that does really is reveal the tile so that everybody can see where the pit trap is after it has been discovered. And then of course the accompanying mechanic that the heroes now have, which is the ability to jump over the pit or even go inside the pit and search it for treasure like a room unto itself. A little odd, but kind of cool. I mean, after all, you might find plenty of gold in the pockets of a dead adventurer who previously gently crushed their skull on the floor of the pit trap. And the other trap having object permanence on the board being the falling rock trap. The pit and the falling rock are pretty interesting to me. Expansions further introduce traps like the rolling boulder trap, which at least does add to the creativity and permanence and mechanics of the game, which I think that all traps should do. Now, I'm not saying you can't have a spike trap or a trap where your hero steps on a pressure plate and an arrow fires out of the wall, and just that be that. Those shouldn't have to have board representation. And certainly there are games that do it worse. The trap system is dirty, it's unrefined, perhaps much like the process of going through a dungeon. Number 3, between quest events. There's really nothing to do between quests. It's just quest after quest after quest. The only options you really have are buy things from the merchant or not do that. The sell mechanic, which was introduced, at least allows a little bit more in-between quest action economy, if that's what you could call it, and it does allow players to kind of strategically plan for those in-between quest visits, not just by going into rooms and searching for treasure necessarily, but by hoarding pieces of equipment that they no longer need or don't need to begin with when they find them, such as the wizard finding a battle axe with the intention of selling it at the merchant. That is, unless one of your fellow heroes could use it. Of course, the choice to actually give it to your fellow heroes so that they're stronger, or buy that wizard's staff that you've been eyeballing for the last 3 quests. That's completely up to you, wizard, and nobody will judge you for making that choice. In fact, Zargon approves. Number 4. Cards from the expansions, which largely follow the design convention and style of the base game, are difficult to separate from the base game components after they've been shuffled in. This is a minor complaint, but it's a complaint because it's such a minor fix. All you would need to do is put a symbol or some lettering somewhere on the card that would indicate the expansion that it was included in. And we have a lot of these. We have monster cards, we have equipment cards, we have artifacts, we have stuff that we may very well want to separate out so that our heroes can have a different experience going into the next expansion, whatever that expansion may be. Now, most of us are going to play in a linear fashion, adding cards in as we progress through expansions, and eventually ending up with a treasure deck that is about this big. And you might even be adding expansions and third-party content and all of that, and have multiple decks of treasure at that point. But some of us prefer to keep our treasure and our artifacts and such with the theme of the expansion from which they come. So from Keller's Keep or Return of the Witchlord, we're really just getting more of the same. It's dungeon, dungeon, dungeon. There's nothing wrong with that. The dungeons all follow the theme of the base game, and that makes them really good, very useful expansions. But something like the Frozen Horror is going to have elements of cold, of frozen, of horror, and that's something that I think should be kept to that expansion. I don't want my heroes going to the jungles of Delthrak and finding things that you'd commonly find while playing the Frozen Horror, and vice versa, especially vice versa. Now, perhaps this is something you could fix with a little bit of roleplay, a little bit of lore. You go ahead and add your cards in, and you say that if you do find these things that belong to the other expansion, for lack of a better term, that it's because they belonged to an adventurer who came from that realm and died in this current locale. They couldn't stand this biome. But it's more than just the mechanics of separating out your treasure cards and the decks from which you draw. It's also the chore of taking out the monsters that you know you're not going to use for the current expansion. The dread cultist from Jungles of Delthrak. If my party of heroes make it through Jungles of Delthrak immediately after the base game, and then they go to Mage in the Mirror, and then they go to Mage of the Mirror, we're not going to encounter dread cultists. Not playing rules as written anyway. There's no reason for me to have these cards in my monster deck or anywhere near me. They can go right back in the box, and I have to painstakingly go through and find all the cards that come from that expansion and place them back in that box. And that brings me to my next worst thing about HeroQuest. There is little to no expansion cohesion. What do I mean by this? Well, the nature of the expansions is that they are supposed to be accessible. So when you complete the base game, you can then start on any of the expansions and you can play them in any order. You do not have to stick with a particular order. Not even the one that Avalon Hill suggests as the lore order in which the expansions should be played. I don't know why I'm just waving my monkey around. But that's an ape, Ash. I know. Monkey was funnier to say. Expansion cohesion in this case, meaning the expansions literally, technically have nothing to do with each other. We have a few villains that are brought up. We have a few characters that are mentioned. Cassandra, Skullmar, Sinestra, the Witch Lord, Sir Ragnar. All of these are characters that kind of pop up here and there, and it feels a little bit fan servicey and referential rather than they're sincerely part of a narrative that is more malleable, more tailored to being able to play these expansions in any order. You could play Rise of the Dread Moon and then play Mage of the Mirror. Or you could play Mage of the Mirror and then Rise of the Dread Moon, and this is a testament to a high accessibility of expansions, but they don't rely on one another. And this isn't even really my main complaint, nor is it really a complaint that makes a whole lot of sense. My main complaint about expansion cohesion is that there's no way for your heroes to progress through one and then reach a more challenging version of the next expansion. Because of the accessibility, there's no order to play these expansions in where the challenge makes sense. And that's con number 6. The expansions, really the difficulty of the game as a whole, varies wildly between expansions, between campaigns, between quests. There is a lovely sentiment within the community that the trial, which is the very first quest of the entire game system, the one that you're going to introduce your players to when they first sit down to play HeroQuest for the first time, is supposed to separate the meat from the chaff. And while this can be thought of almost immediately as separating the unskilled or poor constitution players from the stronger ones, it's really just a way to show the players who are sitting down to have a good time that there are going to be game over moments. There are going to be TPKs or total party kills or total party knockouts for the more friendly version, and that gargoyles and dread warriors absolutely suck and must be avoided or taken down as soon as possible at all costs. But from there, the difficulty actually just kind of fizzles out. We have a few really cool moments. We have a few very strong single bad guys, and we have a few very challenging quests because the creators decided that dropping 100 traps and using a ton of strong monsters everywhere, even in very redundant, unnecessary rooms, would somehow add value and engagement to that adventure. But we don't get another adventure like the trial. And when we do, it doesn't feel natural. It feels forced. The party learns to stay together, to not wander around opening every door they see, which really doesn't address the difficulty per se, but more forces them into, again, a meta. The game of best in slot, but behavior-wise, within the game. Of course, some of that could be mitigated by the search system, and that's the worst thing about HeroQuest number 7. The search system, which it is not called in the game book or rules, is the idea that you have 3 of your 6 possible actions that all deal with searching a room. Having to search a room 3 times, once for traps, once for secret doors, and once for treasure, is a bottleneck. If all of the players are patient and they all have time and they all find the experience of searching relaxing, then that's fine. And if they're not particularly concerned with searching for treasure because they don't want to risk drawing a wandering monster card or a trap, then that kind of helps the issue. But both of those things are kind of incidental to the way searches are handled, rules as written to begin with. Once you've felled the final monster in a room, a search for treasure feels like an appropriate reward. But of course, before you do that, you better search the room for traps first, because many rooms will have trapped chests, which is actually a point of respect towards the trap system, but doesn't help what I'm saying here. Getting through an adventure takes substantially longer if all of your players do want to search for treasure, traps, and doors. And even though doors and traps only have to be searched for once, all of your heroes can search for treasure individually. That's also something that's a bit of a downer because there's no good way to track that. Your hero goes in, they search for treasure. What can you do to remember that they searched that room for treasure? What can they do to remember that they searched that room for treasure? Granted, it's not going to be brought up very often. It's not really that big of a deal, but it does introduce that annoying little factor of, I searched for treasure. Well, you've already done that. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. I don't remember doing that. Well, I remember you doing that. Well, can you prove it? Well, no, because I don't have the can you disprove it? No. Imagine a world where you're playing HeroQuest, but there are no traps to search for. Instead, a trap is maybe a roll of the trap die. And if you roll a trap, then your character draws from a trap deck. Other than that, there's no treasure to search for. You automatically get the treasure in that room when the last monster is defeated if you choose to take the treasure. Secret doors appear as soon as all monsters in a room are defeated, or they just appear if you go into a room that's empty, thereby negating all of a need to search for anything at all. Think about how much breezier a game would go with those in effect, perhaps refined to some extent and then placed into effect. But your characters go on and they risk finding treasure, even if it means getting an arrow to the knee or a wiggly monkey to the face, because we have to scrape by in terms of character customization and growth, and that's my next point. There isn't a real character progression system in HeroQuest. You just take the gold that you find, which you will find in increasingly copious amounts as you progress through the campaigns, and you will buy things from the armory in between quests. Now, there are exceptions to this, where some expansions do introduce a little bit more, but it's nothing that applies to the entire game system by default. The most you can do to build your character is give them a crossbow, a longsword, or a broadsword, chainmail, a helmet, plate mail, bracers, a shield, a battle axe, and move on. And before you know it, 3 of your 4 heroes are all wearing the exact same gear. They have the exact same getup. You've got 3 toolkits in your possession. And if your wizard is lucky, he'll have a couple of cool things too. But other than that, no character customization, very little wiggle room in terms of play style. Play style, which is all but abolished once you consider the meta. And if only there weren't a meta, if only there were some character customization, if only traps were a little bit breezier, then we wouldn't have so many systems of mods and homebrew. And that leads me to my next point. There's absolutely nothing wrong with homebrew. Homebrew is an amazing achievement by a community. It's a testament that the game is doing well enough to have people that are thinking creatively about how to improve it or make it more appropriate for their table. That said, fixing a game's flaws is not the job of the player in any way, shape, or form. And for many people, HeroQuest perhaps facilitates a necessity of including mods or homebrew of some type, any type at all, to make the game better for your table. That is not at all to say that players everywhere aren't completing the base game system and then moving on to the expansions and tackling them in whatever order they please and finishing everything up, maybe even to 100% completion goal without using homebrew of any kind. That is absolutely happening. But for a lot of folks, homebrewing the game is a necessary step to making it fun. The game isn't fun for 100% of people, which is fair and realistic. And to be sure, changing elements of a game's core system in order to better fit your table doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with the game at all. But when they exist solely to address things about the game that are seen as problematic on a slightly wider scale, and when multiple publicly available homebrew systems for the game all attempt to fix the same issues, then you start to wonder if maybe the issues are perhaps ones that could have been avoided during the initial design stages of the game. No game is perfect, except maybe chess and rock, paper, scissors. Well, I thought rock, paper, scissors was perfect until I saw Squid Games Season 2. And now I know rock, paper, scissors -1 exists. And now I'm just not sure what to think about life at all. But people's need to add homebrew is only emboldened, strengthened by expansions that come out that introduce new mechanics. And that's because, despite all of the praise I have given to expansions for being accessible, well, my 10th worst thing about HeroQuest is that expansion content is not the easiest thing to access. It could be worse, don't get me wrong, but expansion content is unlocked in a linear fashion. This means when you get done with the base game system, you then go on to play expansion X of your choice, whatever that may be. I'm not saying the base game system is tough by any means. It's 14 quests. You should be able to get through it with the same party of heroes, and if you lose a hero or 3 along the way, then a new hero entering the party and fighting alongside experienced heroes isn't really going to be a big deal. It's pretty much incidentally designed for mostly a party of brand new heroes to be able to complete it, especially if they know what they're doing. But you have to finish that to get to any given expansion's content. And while I'm aware that most people can just go ahead and mix in the content and the mechanics to supplement the base game, even though the party hasn't completed the requirements of getting through the 14 quests, that would technically tie into being homebrew and would actually be addressed by 2 other points on this list. An example of a really great way to do homebrew, although it's a pretty old example by now, would be the character expansion packs for Warhammer Quest. Now, the Hero Collection packs in HeroQuest do much of the same thing. They put a new hero in the game, and your Players can choose to be that hero day one. You don't have to wait for any particular expansion to get unlocked, although the questions are often asked. What do I need to do to play this hero, and can I play this hero with the base game? But the hero packs for Warhammer Quest, the 1995 edition, introduced new gameplay mechanics for that hero, not only in the adventure mode, but in the roleplay mode as well, and the advanced version of gameplay. It effectively introduces things that aren't present in the game system out of the box, besides the character, like the concept of places that this type of character is able to go in towns. And it allows you to do that day one of playing the game, as long as you have the game and that specific character expansion. No questions asked, or perhaps many questions asked. I don't know what kind of questions people had back in the day. They didn't have the same access to things that we did now. 1995 was a little bit different. It was a simpler time. This goes back to expansion cohesion as well, but if you want to get to a particular gameplay mechanic that an expansion offers, that mechanic is not referenced anywhere else in any other expansion, or at least that's the most likely case. I'm looking at you, Alchemy deck, and I'm looking at you, Empowered Monsters, and so on and so forth, which means that not only do you not get to access that particular content before you have finished playing through the 14 quest campaign, but you won't have access to that content after you leave the expansion either, because there's just no rules to support its existence, because that depends wildly on what the mechanic is specifically, and you will probably go and split hairs to find exceptions to this, but at a higher level of generalization, this is a true thing, a truth. And those are the 10 worst things about HeroQuest. Don't worry, if this video brought you down, if it made you a little bit depressed, I'm going to bring you back up, because I'm a man of balance. I was born a Libra after all, and I will soon be sharing the top 10 best things about HeroQuest. So stay tuned, but make sure that you put those spicy takes in the comments below. Was I wrong about any of this? Was I wrong about most of it? Was I wrong about all of it? That's up to you to tell me. Thank you to patrons, YouTube members, and all of that, and I will see you in the next exciting adventure. Until then, brave heroes, farewell for now.